I would now like to welcome one of the joint chairs of the just formed Quit Afghanistan group, great campaigner for peace and justice. Please give a warm welcome to Caroline Lucas.
Thanks very much to Stop the War and to Jeremy for organising this meeting. Thanks to so many of you for coming tonight. And I just wanted to offer a few more reflections. Many of the things have been said, but I was just thinking back to Prime Minister's questions today. And there's a tradition, as you probably know, that at the beginning of Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister reads through the names of all of those soldiers who've died since the last Prime Minister's questions. And okay, we've had the summer break, so that's one explanation. But I don't know how others felt here, but it felt to me like that list of names was never going to end this time. It really, you know, hit you in the stomach. And then, of course, I felt it wasn't actually the Prime Minister; it was Nick Clegg who was taking Prime Minister's questions, and you felt like he probably himself was feeling this because he read this very, very long list, and then he obviously felt the need to say, but of course they were all doing this wonderful job keeping us safe. And I think if there's one thing that we really need to challenge, as Lindsay and others have said, is the idea that our presence in Afghanistan is keeping us safe. You know, to the contrary, it is making us much less safe. Lindsay was talking about the security to get into this place. I'm still not quite used to seeing the screens. This one isn't on yet, but if it were on, it would say security alert severe, threat severe. And that's just a little bit disconcerting as you kind of walk around. And that is also a product of the kind of foreign policy that we've been pursuing in this country for far too many years. But what I wanted to say really is that I think that when it comes to Afghanistan, it seems that we're struck by a peculiar kind of amnesia, that there is so much that we've forgotten, that first of all, there's no real memory that we sought to crush and dominate that country throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. And while we seem to have forgotten about that, I think the Afghans certainly haven't. There's no sense either that the sentiment expressed by advocates of the war time and again, in other words, that to pull out now would be a betrayal of those who have lost their lives so far, that sentiment is exactly what they said around Vietnam. And yet we hear it again and again. And I think another thing we need to challenge is the idea that it's somehow patriotic to send more troops to die when others have also died. That makes no sense at all. The truly patriotic thing to do would be to think how we get our brave troops home as soon as possible and as safely as possible. There's no sense either also about, you know, the more recent history really in Afghanistan, where the Soviets who invaded in '79, and within a very few years their soldiers were losing their limbs and their lives to the landmines, the IEDs of their day, amid angry complaints about loss and shortage of helicopters and so on. And so, as Jonathan Friedland said in an article in The Guardian, whatever other reactions we might have to the fate of the coalition in Afghanistan, and those emotions might be horror and grief and despair, surprise certainly shouldn't be among those emotions that we feel about what's happening in Afghanistan. The most important thing we should be remembering perhaps is why we were told we were going there in the first place. As Lindsay said, we've been told so many myths since that it's about our safety, or it's about democracy, or it's about women's rights, that it's hard to get back to actually what we were told at the time, wrong though it still was. But yet we've allowed, or the politicians have allowed in many respects, the myths to go on, and we need to challenge them. It was sold to us as a simple premise. It's not a vote, is it? That's just the end. It was sold to us on a simple premise that it was supposed to be about self-defense. The objective was supposed to be about capturing Osama bin Laden and preventing Al-Qaeda from using Afghanistan as a base from which to launch further attacks. That rationale is as a distant memory, and of course Al-Qaeda has now been effectively dispersed right across the globe. You know, it has been utterly counterproductive in terms of being able to try to work out how to contain Al-Qaeda. They simply go over the border to Pakistan and elsewhere. So it seems a very odd thing to still be focusing so much on Afghanistan. And again, ministers tell us constantly that we have to be fighting in Afghanistan to keep us safe in this one, but we need to be reminding them that the terror plots against Britain weren't hatched in Afghanistan, but either in Pakistan or indeed in Britain itself. And if we follow the logic of the ministers, then it would sound as if we ought to be sending tanks into Dewsbury, which I sincerely hope we're not about to do. The human cost of all of this is what should concern us, and we already know that many, many thousands of people are dying, our own troops, but also uncounted numbers of Afghan civilians. And I'm sure others would have mentioned before I got in just the way in which those leaked reports that found their way onto the WikiLeaks site, talking about how those civilian deaths are systematically covered up. I mean, that reinforces what we have suspected all along, but I think, again, it's very, very clear that there has been a policy of trying to shut down information about just how many civilians are being killed through our presence in Afghanistan. The drones as well, that we are increasing our use of deadly drones, the Reaper drones, and of course they are going to be indiscriminate. If you have a drone, then almost by definition it's going to be much harder. So that even if you were to buy into the logic of using some kinds of mechanisms to try to target Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, then by using drones, in a sense, you are committing yourself to more civilian casualties. Not only that, but we are also using what's called enhanced blast or thermobaric weapons. You know, perhaps abstract language, but those weapons are deeply horrible weapons that basically use combined heat and pressure to kill people over a wide area by sucking the air out of their lungs and destroying their internal organs. That is what is going on in our name in Afghanistan, and that is what people should know. According to Human Rights Watch, and of course we know this, that there's been a very poor track record in holding forces accountable for attacks in violation of the laws of war that cause civilian deaths and injury. And it was interesting to see that the US Lieutenant Colonel David Kilcullen has said that US aerial attacks on the Afghan-Pakistan border have killed 14 Al-Qaeda leaders at the expense of 700 civilian lives. I'm not very good at mathematics, but you can see that that is just a heavy, hugely disproportionate price to be paying, even if you were to suggest that killing Al-Qaeda leaders was a good thing to do. Alongside the US and British military in Afghanistan is a shadow army of private military and security companies who are operating largely outside of any kind of legal or democratic control. And I think we need to be mindful as well about how that is adding to the civilian death toll. There was a